Hey there, welcome to the program. Joining me tonight, the Liberal member for Higgins, Dr Katie Allen, health expert and chair of the Council on the Ageing, Jane Holton, former New South Wales Premier Mike Baird, who now heads up aged care provider Hammond Care, the Shadow Minister for Senior Australians and Aged Care Services, Claire O'Neill, and joining us from Melbourne tonight, geriatric medicine specialist Joseph Ibrahim. Please make all of them feel welcome. And to answer those of you who are wondering, we did invite Ministers Greg Hunt and Richard Colbeck on the program tonight, who they share responsibility for aged care. Neither of them made themselves available, but we do promise to keep trying. We know that you've got lots of questions for them. Remember, as always, you can stream us live on iView, but not on Facebook. Currently, you can, however, join the conversation on Instagram and Twitter. Quanda is the hashtag. Please do keep it nice. We will get to all of your questions on aged care, but first, our first question tonight is the story dominating federal politics right now. It comes from Matthew Bransby-Bell.
Throughout the unfolding events of the Brittany Higgins case and the subsequent additional allegations of sexual assault by a Liberal Party staffer, members of government who have fronted the media can't seem to hold their word on how they handled the issue, the timeline and support offered to Brittany. My question to the panel is, at what point does the government need to take accountability that they may have not handled this the right way?
Katie Allen.
Well, thank you, Matthew. I think the first thing to say is this is a very, very sensitive issue, and I'd just like to say firstly that Brittany Higgins has really been an incredibly courageous woman, and I think it's, you know, unbelievable that she's telling her story now and that she's now reported it to the AFP. This is an incredibly traumatising event. And, you know, she's probably going through quite a significant re-traumatisation in some ways now. And I would say that it's complex because at the end of the day, this is a criminal investigation now, and it's really important that we never let something like this happen again. I mean, every single workplace should be safe, and Parliament House is no different. And I would say what we're seeing is quite a change in Parliament. It's actually shocked I think both sides, or all sides of Parliament, and we're seeing, I used to say the winds of change, warm winds of change were coming. There's like a howl going down the corridors of Parliament. I think this is a real Me Too moment for Parliament, and things need to change.
What is changing though right now? Because the government is not really accepting that this has been handled incorrectly, from what I can tell.
Well, I think the issue is that this is a situation where a young woman is the person who has the agency to make the report to the AFP and to go forward with that decision. She has now decided to come forward, and the Prime Minister's been pretty clear that he understands and respects that she does no longer think that she has the support that she wanted to have, and that she is rethinking about that. And I think we need to respect that the journey of trauma.
Do you think your colleagues got it wrong?
In my heart of hearts, no, actually. I think that Linda Reynolds, who's a great advocate for women, did everything she thought was appropriate at the time. It's always easy to look back in hindsight. Linda is a woman who has great determination and courage, and she's a great supporter of women. I think she personally must find this devastating, actually.
Claire O'Neill.
I don't think we're going to get any change until we get accountability, and we need some answers here. Let's not sort of shy away from how serious this is. We're talking about an alleged rape that was committed in our workplace in a ministerial office, literally metres from where the Prime Minister goes to work every day. And the way this is handled is nothing short of absolutely despicable. That's my honest feeling about it. We've got a young woman here who was actively encouraged not to go to police. So when you're hearing government MPs say this is about her choice, that is not what she says. She says she was told to choose between her job and pursuing justice, and the position she was in at that time, she chose to pursue justice.
She didn't say she
but we've also got
she felt like that.
We've also got
it's different.
The
incorrect.
Sorry, can I just continue? We've also got the fact that we know that many people around the Prime Minister at the time knew about this, and he claims that he didn't know, which I think is frankly pretty implausible. But what is really going on here is people have covered up a crime. And let's remember that the ultimate thing that happened here is that the alleged perpetrator of this crime left the Parliament not in handcuffs, but with references from people who work from the government, and then he went on to commit another alleged sexual assault. So the idea that this is not a matter of public interest of the highest order is just wrong, and what we need to keep doing is pursuing the Prime Minister until these questions are answered.
We need to make clear these are allegations at this stage. What did you object to?
Well, you know, I think that the way that it's been, I think the way that you're speaking about, Claire, doesn't really reflect the way that I've seen the events unfold. And I just think
Shall we listen to Brittany Higgins? She's the one with agency here, and she says she doesn't have a choice.
She didn't say she was told. She said she felt that she had to make a choice. And I think there are a lot of women, and I think this goes back to a wider cultural issue. I think women feel this sense of injustice about not being able to speak out. And I've heard from women who've rung me up, constituents who've rung me up and said, we have not wanted to speak out about allegations of sexual violence, sexual harassment, because we worry about the consequences. We worry that if we go to the courts, we won't get a fair hearing, and they're worried about the cultural aspect.
So you're saying there's going to be change. There is howls of change. There are 4 separate inquiries that are going to take place now. Will the findings of all of those be made public?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that there needs to be an arm's length inquiry. I think that the public deserve and respect.
This is a simple question. Will they be made public?
Well, I'm not the decision maker, so I can't make a comment about what the outcomes will be. My understanding is they'll be made public, but I can't make that. Look, that's unfair, Hamish. I can't make that declaration because I'm not the executive. What I would say is that...
Do you think they should be made public, though?
I think they should be made public,
Sorry,
absolutely.
Hamish, could I step in? There's no track record with the government or parliament making these types of inquiries public, and they're more likely to be kept locked in a drawer. I think the other point to make here is the point scoring from both political parties forgets the survivor in this case. And to express shock that sexual violence could occur in Parliament, I think beggars belief here. We know that there's a millennia of sexual violence towards women, that 1 in 6 women in our community are subjected to sexual violence. To imagine this wouldn't occur in Parliament is a nonsense, especially when Parliament sets and condones a standard of really poor behaviour and a lack of respect for individuals. And we see that every day, and we're seeing it again here today on the panel.
Claire O'Neill, this is not just about one side of politics. Are you aware of any of your colleagues who could be similar, subject to similar accusations?
Not specifically, but I don't think anyone in my side of politics has ever said that this is just about something that's going on in the Liberal Party. I think, in fairness, the issues there, the cultural issues there are much more severe, and that's why we keep seeing this sort of pattern of events with women who say that they've been sexually assaulted and basically have been silenced and not allowed to tell their story. But there's no question that there would be issues in every political party about this issue. And I think Joe makes some good points there about the political process and how how we treat one another in politics. It's actually not, the dignified kind of line of work that it ought to be. So I think there's big work to be done here across the parliament. But I say again, we're not going to get there if basically the government continues to treat this as some kind of political sex scandal rather than what it is, which is an alleged rape for which there's a 12-year jail sentence attached. It's an incredibly serious thing, and I think people need to be honest and come forward and tell us what they knew.
So, Hamish...
After you, Jo.
Thank you. I think we should keep in mind here, and all of us should have huge empathy for Brittany. I mean, she has been through a very difficult situation, and I think to acknowledge that for many women who've heard her story, who probably have been re-traumatised themselves because they've experienced something similar. And I think it's good that we're going to have an inquiry. That's really important. But let's be clear, this is a workplace. And we can move now to put in place standards that guide members of parliament, their chiefs of staff, the security guards, the cleaners, about what they do if they come across an event like this. So I don't know why we need to wait. Why can't we now say, in the event that you come across a circumstance like this, this is what you should do? Because I think it is a fair enough comment that in many cases people are unsure. They think they're being empathetic to the victim. They try to do their best. But I think it's about time, in common with every other workplace. I spent today going through these issues in respect of workplaces. We've got an obligation to our staff. They work for the country. They should be looked after.
What should all of these ministers that knew about it have done?
Well, I certainly think, and it's not just the ministers, but let's be honest, we are pretty clear that security guards were aware that there was a young woman in serious distress. And the fact that police were not called at that time, I think is regrettable, and the fact that there were not proper escalation procedures that actually brought this to the attention of authorities early, I think is regrettable. And certainly those kind of workplace incidents should be properly reported and then properly dealt with.
That's right.
Hamish, I think, Hamish,
Just want to let Mike Baird in.
you know, I mean, firstly, I have seen the story, and Brittany is someone that I cannot quite believe is inspiring the nation. I mean, the courage she's shown, what she's personally been through. I mean, she needs, in terms of her personal story, to go through the process. She needs all the support we can possibly give her. She's also calling for change. And I think that's on all of us. And I think that let's not just think of this as one issue. It is ongoing, it is widespread. And it's not just the Commonwealth Parliament. I reflect personally on it, you know, as being in the New South Wales Parliament and a leader of a party and a government. I had a chance to do something significant here, and I didn't. And that onus is on me. And I think that I hope that what Brittany has done has said to the nation, we must do more. And it's every work.
Are you sorry you didn't do more?
Well, I think it's a reflection. So, yeah, I mean, I am. I personally am. Because to have this situation, and there are others that we've heard about, is heartbreaking. They deserve all the support. There should be a culture, and a culture comes from the leadership. There should be a culture that anyone that goes through an event like that should be able to put their hand up and go through it. And there's not enough independence in the parliaments. There's not enough personal support for anyone going through those circumstances. There's not enough accountability and consequences of action. And that's on everyone.
So are you saying our federal leaders need to act now, not wait for all of these reviews? They actually need to make the changes now?
Look, it is up to them to respond. My point is there must be a response. There must be action. I think when you hear report after report, there's a sense, well, nothing's going to happen. Something must happen and should happen.
And I think Mike's exactly right.
Can I just hold on, Joseph? I'll take one more point from Katie and then we can move on.
I think Mike is absolutely right with that. And I think that we, you know, there is definitely, and I think, Claire, you'd agree, that across the parliament there's this, as I said, a Me Too moment that things need to change. And what I would say is, coming from a professional environment, there are aspects and processes of our workplace that I believe are not professional enough, and I've been calling for professionalisation of things like HR and where to report to, what to do. People come from all different backgrounds and we need to change that culture.
OK, let's take our next question. It comes from Yumi Lee.
Following the revelation of Brittany Higgins, the spotlight has been on Parliament House and its culture of silencing women who experience abuse and sexual assaults. There are 50 cases of sexual abuse and assaults in nursing homes every week. Why is there no outrage about this cold, hard fact? Why is nobody held accountable? And why have we as a community decided that older women are not counted and they don't matter?
Joseph Ibrahim.
Well, I think Hamish Yumi's made a terrific point, and I'll come back to that. I just want to make another point, is that asking the Prime Minister and leaving it up to him to react, I think, again, is nonsensical. It's pretty clear that you shouldn't lay hands on anyone without their permission. The other thing is this education to respond to an incident misses the whole point about preventing the whole issue from occurring in the first place. And Parliament can certainly establish something around the prevention of sexual violence in the workplace. In terms of nursing homes, since 2007, the Serious Incident Reporting Scheme has been reporting through to the Department of Health incidents of sexual violence that have been occurring, and these now number in their thousands. There has not been a single report from either government or Parliament or the department about what action has been taken and what's been learned from all of those assaults. myself and my team have presented to at least 3 different parliamentary inquiries. We made the submission to the Royal Commission on 2 separate occasions, and we get absolute silence as if older women don't matter. And that I think is really outrageous and is an abomination on our society, that we ignore older women, our mothers, grandparents. Yeah, it really it makes me incredibly angry.
Mike Baird, you run an aged care service now. There's obviously been proposed recommendations put to the Royal Commission. We're going to learn what the findings of the Royal Commission are next week. This is not an easy one to solve, but from what you can see, how do we do that?
Well, I mean, this issue is the same. I mean, this is a very vulnerable group. And, I mean, ultimately, we're in a position that if an event takes place, you need to take the appropriate action. And there must be consequences. You must address it very seriously, individual, by case by case. Now, more broadly, as an industry and a sector, there is no tolerance whatsoever. There can't
But Mike, that can't be true. It's been 13 years that this has been visible in the department. This is reported annually, and there's been no systemic change in the aged care sector. The Royal Commission has not, in fact, made any recommendations on the prevention of sexual violence in the council assisting. So that's a major issue. The review by the federal government into the Serious Incident Reporting Scheme was asking staff to judge whether a person was impacted, and were more concerned about the reporting burden than the trauma it caused to older women and their families.
Yeah, well, Joseph, I mean, I'm not in any way disagreeing with you. I mean, part of the reason we're here tonight is there's a number of issues that haven't been addressed. And you know, this is an incredibly important issue. Matters of broad care are incredibly important. Every single one we have to do better on. And the onus is on the providers. The onus is on the sector.
Mike, how would you motivate government, given that you've been the Premier? How would you motivate government and the department to take action?
Well, no, Joseph, that's on us. You know, that's on the providers. You know, we oversee these residential homes. We have.
So then, do you think the provider should be criminally responsible for those actions? Are you taking that level of responsibility to the sector?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is important you do it case by case, Joseph. I think the broader issue...
Sorry, Mike, but case by case does not address what is in fact an epidemic. We don't treat COVID case by case. We take a systems view and we look at what's happening in terms of the culture of the country and what happens at the individual level. Every case has to be dealt with and looked after with compassion. But when you get this volume of assaults occurring, this isn't one place. In the same way that, you know, people are calling out far more assaults that have occurred in Parliament following Brittany's brave stand, and there's bound to be a whole lot more that just people aren't willing to speak up. It's not enough to say we're going to deal with it case by case. It allows people to brush over it and pretend that it's not a problem.
OK. At this point, I just want to remind everyone watching, if this conversation raises any issues for you, you can contact 1800-RESPECT or Lifeline on the numbers that are on your screen right now. Now, I want to take you to Perth right now. If you've been watching 7:30 earlier this evening or reading any of these reports today, you would have seen the harrowing story of Lee Hammond and her father, Brian Hunter, who died following an incident at a nursing home late last year. Lee joins us now live from Perth. Good evening to you. I think the nation is probably feeling enormous sympathy for you tonight. I'm really sorry to learn the details of your father's death. What do you think that your father's story tells us that we did not already know about the immense problems in our aged care system in Australia?
I just think it's appalling that such vulnerable people who've worked so hard their whole lives have been neglected and treated by a system who's supposed to care for them. You know, I just don't know who's accountable for such injustice. I just feel that it's criminal that these actions have actually injured and taken my father's life from him. you know, the families have been... I've been robbed, and all these families have been robbed of their loved ones, and it's just... How can this treatment really not be criminal? I just don't understand it.
You obviously thought your father was in good hands, was in safe hands. How do you feel about the way
That's right.
his life ended?
Oh, it's just totally unacceptable. It's just absolutely unacceptable. We just can't believe it. He's been taken from us years before his time. I've lost my father, and my mother's lost her husband, and my children have lost their grandfather. It's just completely distressing for everyone.
Jane Holton, Lee's point about accountability.
Well, Lee, let me start by saying how terribly sorry I am to hear of your tragic loss. I think all of us, our heart goes out to you at what must be a really difficult time. And you're right.
Yes,
we need to make sure that our frail, our vulnerable older people are really well cared for. And that includes making sure that there are enough staff to look after those people, and that their circumstances, regardless of the reason that they're in residential aged care, that they get the care that they actually need. I think your point about making sure that our system is transparent, it's accountable, and that you can have the confidence, and everyone can have confidence that their relative is being well cared for, is such an important point. And we're looking now to the Royal Commission to make really concrete recommendations. But I do think we already know some of the things that need to happen here. And so all I can say to you is we will all be looking to those recommendations and then to the actions that need to be taken to make sure that everybody can have confidence. Now, I should say, because there's so many people who'll be watching tonight who've got an elderly relative in care, that there are very many providers who do provide a great quality of care. I've had a mother in aged care, she had dementia, and she was well cared for. But I do think we want every single person to get the standard of care that my mum had and that we all want for our older people. But our thoughts are with you.
Katie Allen, given all the scrutiny that there has been on the aged care system while a Royal Commission is underway, doesn't it defy belief that something like this could happen?
100%, Hamish. I mean, something like that, and Lee, thank you for sharing your story, because by speaking out, you know, it exposes some problems in the system. But the thing is, we know what the problems are. We need actions. And I think everybody in this room and everyone watching knows that we need major reform. And I don't think there's much doubt about that. The big question is, what will that reform look like, and what will it deliver to make sure that everybody can feel safe as they age? We're all going to age. Like Jane, my father actually had high care dementia needs and was in a home for the last years of his life and died. And as a daughter, putting my father into care, it's one of the hardest things that you have to do. You want them to be safe. You want to know that every minute that they're there, they're going to be supported. And I really, my heart goes out to you, Lee, because no one ever wants to hear that a loved one has been abused or harassed or mistreated, or, you know, what's happened. And I hope that the investigations find the problem, particularly for your father's situation. But more importantly, we need to have a system that, I mean, it's rapidly growing, this system. That's the issue. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think what has happened with this Royal Commission is we've had 20 reviews in 20 years, and there's been minor changes, but what this Royal Commission hopefully will do will put the pressure on for major reform. And I think there is a commitment to major reform, because the ageing population deserves it.
Lee, does a commitment to major reform make any difference to you right now?
Sorry?
Does a commitment to major reform post-Royal Commission make any difference to you and your family right now?
Well, no, not really. It doesn't help. Doesn't really help us, does it? It's what's happened to him is,
No, it doesn't.
It's very difficult for us.
Lee, we really appreciate you joining the conversation tonight. Thank you so much for your time. I want to bring in our next questioner tonight. It's Robin Weinberg, who's got a question, I suppose, which follows on from that story.
Thanks, Hamish. I'm 77. My husband is 73. We're self-funded retirees, or at least I am for the moment. We're in reasonable nick, but we're both terrified at the thought of going into care, and pray we'll die before that happens. We've seen how people are treated, and it's not very pretty. Apart from losing all personal freedom and any vestige of independence, the costs are frightening and would probably take every penny we have. Jail might be an improvement. I don't know what the solution is, but I think the first thing is to cease privately run aged care facilities.
Yeah.
You can't expect people to provide high quality care and make a decent profit without charging enormous fees. With what I've seen, I wouldn't put a dog or a cat into these facilities. Suggest every MP spends a week in a high dependence ward. Why do profits come before people?
Sarah Neal.
Well, I think you're asking a really good and difficult question there, and part of the reason that we've got a Royal Commission on foot is to really dig into the heart of what you're asking there, which is it possible to actually run a dignified, civilised aged care system by private providers? And I think we'll get a good recommendation from the Royal Commission about that. But can I just say, there are so many issues in this, and one of the ones I just want to raise with you is this idea of not wanting to go into care. Firstly, it's not just residential aged care that is a system in crisis here, it's also home care, which is the system that is meant to help you stay in your own home. So what we know absolutely for sure is that most Australians want to age in their own home. They actually don't want to go into residential aged care. And this home care system is in an absolute mess. There are 100,000 people on a waiting list for home care packages. 28,000 people died over the last 2 years while they were waiting for support, and thousands more had to go into residential aged care because their condition deteriorated while they were on this wait list. It is inhumane what has happened. The government actually goes to your home and says you need a level 4 package, the maximum level of package, but we're not going to give it to you for 18 months or 2 years. So I think that's a major issue of concern for us. If I can just make one more very quick point. Aged care is an issue that affects, I think, far more people than actually realise it. Because when you ask most Australians, they say, I don't want to go into residential aged care, I'd like to age at home. But the facts tell us that, in fact, many of us will end up in aged care without really expecting it or planning it. So if you're a woman in this audience tonight, even someone my age, my chances of going into residential aged care are 55%, more than likely. And the average length of stay in aged care isn't 2 or 3 weeks, it's between 2 and 3 years. So if we want to get change out of this government, which has had 8 years, by the way, to do something about this problem and done absolutely nothing, then we need to mobilise a little bit, and we've got to talk to politicians and say this matters to us.
I just want to go back to Robin. You say you think jail might be better. When you imagine going into aged care, what is it that's running through your mind? What are you picturing?
Oh, look, we had a very old family friend who has since died, and I remember I used to go and visit her frequently, and quite often she was just left in a urine-soaked long chair. The urine was dripping down. They didn't change her. Things like that. They dropped her when they were meant to be, you know, they meant to use a bed lift, but they didn't. And they dropped, I know the nurses dropped her. The quality of the care was terrible. It was absolutely terrible, and it wasn't cheap either.
Mike Baird?
So, Robin, I pick up something quite personal here because my mother is in care and has been for a long period. And the day that I sort of handed it across to other hands to care for, the whole family remembers how traumatic that was. You know, someone you love so dearly and you're entrusting them to someone else. That is something that is really difficult and many people face. What I think I've seen is actually some incredible care, some incredible care workers and nurses. And I think across the country we've actually lost my earpiece.
We'll get someone to sort that out in a minute.
I think we've lost the value for our care workers and nurses on the front line.
Totally.
Like, they are an army of angels. And I'll just give you a couple of examples that I have seen. Sort of one resident that we have, he has complex dementia, so significant behaviours. He is in the backyard and he is sort of at the hedges, breaking off branches. Every other cottage, totally perfect hedge. His is almost devastated. And the question would be, well, so I've asked, because I was on shift with a nurse watching this. I said, well, why does he do this? Well, he enjoys it. No one else complains, so we let him go about it. And he said, what's really powerful is actually you extend back to his history. His family members have said, well, he used to be, in Italy, in an orphanage. And he was the eldest child in that orphanage. And at night, they didn't get enough food during the day, so at night he used to go out and get fruit and forage. And there's a sense, we think that's what he's doing for these residents. So what was seen as a destructive behaviour was actually beautiful. So that personal, deep connection of care delivered by that team is replicated in many places. We've heard tonight terrible stories, but I've seen numbers and numbers like that.
Yeah, can I just jump in though, Mike? I mean, very much respect what you're saying here, and I'm sure that all of us on the panel hold aged care workers in the utmost admiration. I cannot believe these predominantly female workforce, they are holding this system up. It's a system on its knees. The only thing standing between decimation and a functioning system is these amazing women who are delivering this care. But you're talking about these examples of great care. We've got a Royal Commission report that tells us that this system is in crisis, and it tells us that those instances of amazing care are happening despite how government has treated this system, not because of it, that actually people are having to go around the system effectively to deliver the type of care.
Claire,
so we do need fundamental reform here. There's no question about that.
I couldn't agree more, Claire. I am saying that our care workers, they are undervalued.
Undervalued,
underpaid and undertrained.
And they're at breaking point.
But I think at this point of value, it's an incredible job.
But I need to draw this back to Robin's question, though, which was about profit. Jane Holton,
yes.
Should we have for-profit in this sector? Should we have companies that are running aged care facilities feeding profits back to shareholders?
So, Robin, let me make two comments if I could, and I absolutely understand your anxiety, particularly having seen what you've seen. One of the things we do need, actually, is many more community-based places, and one of the things we in the Council on the Ageing have been arguing for is actually more control, so older people can actually choose where they wish to age. But when it comes to, and some people do, sadly, actually do need residential care, particularly people with complex dementias. We know sometimes for families it's very difficult to care for those people. I think it's important to say it's the quality of the care that's important. I don't personally care who runs that service if they deliver great care. And I could point to one of the most egregious examples, the most terrible cases in South Australia. That was run by a state government. So I think it's better to say, are you good at doing this? Are you getting the best people and are you delivering the best care? If you are, well, you should be eligible to provide that care. If you aren't, you shouldn't be anywhere near the system. So I think it's a little early to say, and we'll see what the Royal Commission says, Hamish, I think it's a little early to say it's this is good and this is bad. It's about quality. And if you can't deliver a quality service, you shouldn't be anywhere near it.
Can I add to that, actually? I'll let the clap happen first. Can I just add to that actually I agree with Jane with regards to what the quality of care is, and we know that there are some providers that are not providing the right quality care, and that is the role of government to make sure there's accountability and transparency so that we can build trust back into the system. And I think there is the appetite for change. I think the consumer knows that, I think the public knows that, and I think the government recognises that, and that is why the Prime Minister called for a Royal Commission 2 years ago. It was the first Royal Commission he called because he knows it needs to be fixed. And it's been brutal, quite frankly, watching some incredible stories being shared, and thank you to those people who've shared it and to the people who've contributed to the Royal Commission. But it is wrapped up with this concept that, firstly, our population in developed countries is ageing very rapidly. We're getting older as a society, and what's happening is with in-home care increasing quite rapidly, and there's been a tripling of in-home care places by the government. There's a real commitment to those million home care packages being provided, and we've increased it 3 times in the last several years. So the important thing, though, is as the in-home care ageing is happening, the aged care residences means that there's more healthcare needs. So people are entering into aged care homes frailer, with more comorbidities, meaning they're sicker and older, and therefore the system is having to wrap around more clinical care. So people want control and choice, and they want trust and transparency. And we've got to make sure that we give the right resources, which includes training for nurses and upskilling, but we need to recognise that this is a system that has been under enormous pressure as we age as a population, with the residential aged care even ageing even faster. And I think there's a deliberate decision that we want to make sure that people can age at home as long as possible in a safe way, but also that there's a clinical support system led by nurses, and that we increase the quality of training and the quality of care that's provided in the aged care sector, so that we can all feel that when our loved ones go there, that they can be safe.
Can I just quickly jump in on one short point here? You know, Katie's talked about this sense of huge surprise that, you know, amazing, we've had a Royal Commission, look at all the awful things are happening. This has been a consistent problem for a long time, and since the government was elected in 2013, there have been 21 major reports given to them that show all or some of the problems that the Royal Commission has just given light to. Why would we trust the Morrison government to fix this system? I genuinely don't understand the answer. They have cut $1.7 billion out of this system. It's hanging on by a thread. And now the government's suddenly saying, oh, we've just realised there are all these problems and now we're going to fix them. It doesn't stack up.
So, Claire, I asked the question, there were $357 billion committed in taxes by the Labor government the last election, and I don't believe there's an increase in residential funding or in aged care in-home funding. So, and the same is true for the 2020 budget. I don't believe there's any financial commitment. Now, there's been significant financial commitment by the federal government. There is a significant commitment for reform through the Aged Care Royal Commission, and we know that things like the Aged Care Royal Commission are bringing together the opportunity for major reform. So it's easy for you to say you're not doing enough, but you haven't made any commitment either. And I think the
we're not in government, Katie. Your party's been responsible for this system.
You certainly talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk.
Your party has been responsible for this system for almost 8 years, and now you're saying, shock horror, we've cut billions out of it and things are deteriorating. What do you think is going to happen when you take billions of dollars out of a system? Standards decline and people get hurt.
Hamish, my point on this debate, and then Joseph, over to you. Like, my desperate hope is that this is bipartisan. Like, we actually have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get this right. So I understand the points, Claire, and there's a government perspective, but my goodness, you know, does this country deserve an aged care that looks after our elderly with the care and respect that we know they deserve? And we haven't.
And we know we need 100,000 community-based places. That is the level of demand. That is what the waiting list is. And we know now that is what is needed. We also know we need to put more money into residential care.
Okay. I want us to meet more people at the centre of this system. I want to introduce you to Tim Granger and his daughter Prudence, who are here. Tim, it's a few years since we last spoke. You were diagnosed with dementia, I think, when you were 51. You're now 56. How are you doing?
Going well.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a little bit of problem with speech.
Yeah.
So, sorry, what was your?
I wanted to know how you're doing, because I know you're living at home with your beautiful wife, your wonderful daughter, Prue. How do you feel about the prospect of one day going into an aged care facility?
I'd be horrified if it was me. If that's the thing we're looking for, we need to do a lot more than that, don't we?
I think what makes it scary too is that he's so much younger. He's going to be potentially going in his 60s or sooner, which we really want to avoid. But if that occurs, how can he live his best life in these facilities that aren't really set up for him at his age? And it's an issue. There's more people getting diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's.
I know from talking to you and your wife previously that it has been a conversation, and I'm sure it continues to be one for you guys. What do you say to your wife and daughter when this comes up, when you have to talk it through?
When the time comes to go into Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. Well, it's going to be double. It'll be double dipping, and probably then it's going to be about hard for them as well. Very, very hard.
Prue, how do you feel about the prospect of that ever happening?
I'm scared, yeah, because I think it's not something that you think is going to happen so soon. We would like to be able to support him for as long as we can, but the reality is we probably can't. We also have financial concerns because we'd like to be able to put him in a facility that will support him and his needs, but I don't know if we could afford that or if we would get in. And yeah, and just witnessing, especially tonight, listening to everything that everybody's saying and bringing up, it's scary. It's really scary. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that that's a choice you've got to make as a family. Trevor is also here with us tonight. Trevor, how old were you when you were diagnosed with a form of dementia?
30.
I think you were 62?
62.
Yeah. And I know since that diagnosis you've taken up sailing and yoga and golf.
Well,
how was golf this afternoon?
Wet.
Love it.
But I did scrub up.
You scrub up brilliantly, Trevor. How do you feel about the prospect of ever going into an aged care facility?
I'd avoid it like the plague, for starters, and after that I'd continue to find an alternative.
Why avoid it like the plague? What are you so scared of?
When you know the expression, knows as much as a brain surgeon. And I think, no, I haven't got that right.
That's all right.
That's Dad's joke.
What did you want to ask the panel tonight?
Well, the COVID-19 crisis has resulted in some pretty speedy action from governments worldwide, like nothing most people have ever experienced. Will we see the same level of responsiveness and speedy action to adopt the recommendations from the final report of the Royal Commission? Does the immediate future... Oh, sorry.
Just hold on, Joseph. There's a final bit to Trevor's question, and we'll let him get that out.
Thank you. Does the future hold any hope for me and my dementia mates, all 472,000 of them? 472,000. You think COVID's big?
And more coming. Joseph.
I was thinking there was a Melbourne-Sydney bias having been frozen out of the conversation, but the short answer is, will there be the speed of action that we saw with COVID? No, there absolutely won't be. There's no track record demonstrating government's willingness to do that. There's no demonstrated action from the opposition to hold them to account. There was a Senate inquiry in 2005 about the plight of young people in nursing homes. That was over 15 years ago. A promise was made that young people, those under 65, wouldn't be in nursing homes, and it remains a problem 15 years later, and was one of the recommendations addressed in the neglect or the interim report of the Royal Commission. It still hasn't been fully dealt with. That remains a massive problem. There it is possible to maintain people with dementia at home for much longer than is currently happening. And if you see the practices that occur for young men with acquired brain injury who have extensive support services to themselves and their families, that's able to be maintained. There's discrimination that occurs when you get old, and the minute you hit 65, you no longer are eligible for disability services. I'd be encouraging everyone who has dementia to be applying through to NDIS and lobbying for that to be accepted as a disability, because your life would be substantially different with that versus going into the aged care system.
Joseph, I just want to ask, Trevor and Tim, are they right to be as afraid as they are?
Yes.
Well, a short answer is yes, because the way that aged care is currently structured, and you know, the panel's given examples where their loved ones have been well looked after, and I presume that's because they're from a high-income professional background with a reputation, who know who to ask, where to go, and people pay attention when they arrive. For the average patient that I see, the person in low socioeconomic group that has no money, that's a pensioner, they're terrified. They can't stand up for themselves. They do not get listened to. They do not know where to go, and they're scared to prosecute a complaint. And the most important thing about your life as you get older is having some semblance of control, some choice where you can exercise what it is that you want to do with your day. And that is lost in the task-based focus in residential aged care. The care workers don't like the task-based focus, but if they spend time to make a person feel better or feel human, that doesn't get logged as a billable minute or hour. They don't get rewarded for making a person feel better. They get rewarded for completing a task, which is showering this number of people in this set time.
Okay.
And so we've lost the dignity of the person in aged care, and all of the conversation doesn't focus on the dignity of the person. The other point, while I've got the microphone, is this issue of transparency. It would be lovely to have transparency, but the government and Parliament have actively worked, as have the providers, actively worked against transparency for the resident and their family. There's no good measurement of quality performance, and we've had that in hospitals for 2 decades. You cannot find out how many staff work in a home, and there's been 2 amendments that have been knocked back in Parliament last year and the year before, which would have informed families how many people actually work here. So the
Joseph, I am going to give you the microphone back.
Lost.
I will give you the microphone back in a moment, but let's take our next question. It's from Pravind Eswaran.
As a medical student, I am required to have a number of mandatory vaccinations before I can even enter a health workplace. Given the vulnerable population and the history of outbreaks in these facilities, why is the new COVID-19 vaccines not mandatory for staff working in aged care currently?
Jane Holton.
Well, of course, that's a really important question. And I don't know the answer to it. And I think, actually, it's surprising that it isn't mandatory, if I can be quite frank.
You're nodding, Katie Allen.
Yeah, look, I have to say I've been on the record. Thanks for your question, Pravind. We know flu vaccines are mandatory in aged care, and I was on the record of saying I think COVID should be as well, so I'm 100% with you on that. Look, I think...
Why isn't it?
I suspect it may be to do with industrial relations and the workforce and perhaps the unions. I don't really know.
What? That's ridiculous.
Well, I just don't understand why not. And you know,
but it
to
is
be honest...
the government's decision, isn't it?
Well, I think this is an industrial relations issue, and I'm not in the room that has that discussion, but I can't understand why not. I mean, I do know there is one aspect about this COVID vaccine, that there is a very... we're great vaccinators in Australia, but this is a new vaccine and we've had a great public health response. There is a very high level of vaccine hesitancy in the Australian population. So the government's been very clear that we want it to be safe.
Is not the unions, but medical advice from the AHPPC.
Well, I mean, I think the thing about the COVID vaccine is that we want to make sure that people feel there's a sense of transparency and trust, and that we want people to willingly engage in having the vaccine. And so we don't want to feel that this mandatory aspect is going to become politicised or it's going to become problematic. And I think it's very important that people know that the government is going to be very clear in any possible side effects. And as you've seen already, anything that's happening is coming to light immediately. There's no review process. We're being very frank and honest with the public, and I think that's very important. In fact, Professor Skerritt, who's the head of the TGA, is actually the deputy head of the international global vaccine rollouts or vaccine bodies, and he said there's been a global decision to be very declarative to make sure that there's high levels of trust. And I suspect that mandatory aspect is part of that. If you force people to do things, it makes them nervous.
But let's be clear. I mean, we need to know, firstly, how well these vaccines prevent transmission, and I think everyone knows that we're looking to see as these vaccines get rolled out globally, particularly across big populations, if it is the case that they prevent transmission as well as severe disease and death, and that's really the most important thing. Does it stop people getting really sick, and does it stop people dying? And that's the evidence we're now seeing from Scotland. We're seeing it in Israel, which is fantastic. But if that's the case, well, then we want to protect our workers in aged care, but we also want to protect the vulnerable people who are in aged care as well. So I think there's still some questions to be answered here.
OK, our next question comes from Kai Mather.
Thank you, Hamish. My name's Kai, I'm 21, and I grew up watching one grandparent live in complete dependence in a nursing home. I watched another grandparent live mostly independently, and I watched my final two live completely independently together. In many cultures, it's customary to have 3 generations living together under one roof. My question is for the entire panel, and it's, is there a way to help or encourage Australians to keep their elders under the same roof and at home?
Mike Baird.
Yeah, Kai, look, I think it's you're on the heart of something. Yeah, for me, as I've looked at it, I mean, relatively new to the sector, but I've observed, obviously through my parents, the entry into aged care. I think as a nation, we just haven't valued our elderly as we should. I mean, other cultures do so much more. We focus on childhood, adulthood, but for some reason we forget our elderly. Now, I don't know how we've come to that position. And when we get to, so there's a real cultural point, and that's for all of us. And when we come to the Royal Commission and the action and the funding, we can't lose sight that it's actually not about funding. As a nation, if we're putting more money in to the care our elderly deserve, we are richer as a country. It's an investment in Australia, would be the way I'd think about it. So I think all of us have a role that whether they live at home, and obviously there's a shift in home care and there's more coming into home care, there's more capacity to care for at home, but families have a role. But fundamentally, if we believe that our elderly should be valued and they deserve the care they should, then whether it be funding or whether we have a personal role, then that's on us. I mean, what really strikes me is that 40% of residents across Australia do not receive a single visitor in a year. Now, it wouldn't take...
What was that percentage?
40%. That's the average.
Sorry, could I just step in? Because I tried to track that. That's a quote from Ken Wyatt, but I can't find the original source or the data for that, and I'd be fascinated to see it.
Well, Joseph, good news. There's good news, Joseph. So I've looked at
Well, no, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying I can't find the empirical data for that. I think if I can
Joseph,
go to the question...
Joseph, I just want to give you some empirical data. So I've looked at the data in our facilities, and we are under 40%, but higher than 30%. So it is a real problem. And you think about how many people in this country, one visit to an elderly Australian, what would that do? That's not much. Well, that's the onus on us. We all have a role in that.
OK. Well, we've got a high-powered panel tonight, and you've got lots of other questions for them on other topics. We're going to try and get to a couple of those, starting with Linda Mather, who I think is Kai's mum.
After what has been revealed by the Bergen inquiry in New South Wales, how is it that some board of directors for Crown Resorts are still in their positions? And then from that, how is just standing down by some on that board enough to deter poor executive leadership?
I think
Jane
that's
Holton,
a question for me.
You are on the Crown Board.
I am on the Crown Board, and thank you for your question. I think it's actually really important that we talk about these things. I should say at the start, I've not been there very long, and the Commissioner said, quotes, that I left with my integrity intact, which I'm quite pleased about.
It sounds like you gave a pretty feisty appearance from what...
Yes, these things are never easy, and we've seen a number of people. She asked that a number of people stand down, and they have stood down. But I think we need to remember that these are places that employ 20,000 people, and the people who remain on this board are absolutely committed to addressing all of those issues that have been identified and actually making sure that this is not something we ever see again. So I completely understand the concern that's been expressed, but I can...
Are you proud to be associated with Crown?
Look, I debated whether I would join that board.
Do you regret it?
No, because, and I'll tell you why. I have a very strong commitment to public health and to the whole notion of harm minimisation. And we can drive things underground. I'm not a supporter of prohibition. And I thought, well, actually, will I put my money where my mouth is to actually try and improve something here? So I did decide quite consciously that I would take that challenge on. This is not an easy challenge, but as I said, there are 20,000 people who work for Crown, and it should and will be improved, and we will actually redouble our efforts to make sure that happens. So I understand the concern, but I can promise you that that is what we're focusing on.
Mike Baird, you were Premier of New South Wales when a financial deed with Crown was signed. Under the terms of that, Crown is entitled to claim compensation worth 10.5 times the estimated negative financial impact of any action the New South Wales government takes now that changes or has the effect of changing its licence. Do you think that was a mistake in retrospect?
Look, I think what the revelations we've seen, I mean, there's nothing about them that are good. I mean, they're incredibly disappointing.
Yeah, but you put Crown in a pretty strong position if something went wrong.
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the legal contracts. I'm not going to get into the overall approach. I mean, obviously, Jane on the Board of Directors had a response to respond to what they've seen. There are unbelievable sort of allegations that must be addressed, but ultimately that is a matter for them, but they must be.
Yep. Time for one more question before we go from Pearlie McNeil.
Hi Hamish, I'm 81 years old, I'm a pensioner, and I have been thinking about a lot around this pandemic, and I'm sure many of us older Australians during this pandemic have pondered our lives and our future. Will it be okay now, do you think, to have a meaningful discussion about end-of-life choices?
Do you want to just explain, if you wouldn't mind sharing, why this question is so important?
Yes, my partner was 79 years old, suffering with dementia, and the last thing she wanted was to live a life where she didn't know what was going to happen to her. She took her own life. I knew about it, I didn't help her, I did nothing illegal, but the tragedy of her life was dreadful, and I'm with it today and living with it, and I just think it's terribly unfair that I couldn't be with her, that I have felt the pain, and I think we should be able to make a bloody choice if we want to.
Joseph Ibrahim, a quick final thought on that from you.
Well, just to touch on the Crown Casino, that's a classic example.
Joseph, we've got 2 minutes left on the show, so if you wouldn't mind just dealing with Pearlie's question.
All right. Well, I think the issue about end of life is a critical one. I'm a proponent of trying to get people to live their best life before we start to talk about end of life. The issue of choice at end of life, I think, is a very personal one and not one you want the state, church or anyone else to intrude on. I think in Victoria, the population spoke about end of life, and each part of the country is going through that. I think the most important thing for persons with dementia is that we've done everything we possibly can to make their life worthwhile to them before we start this discussion about ending our lives prematurely.
Mike, you're a man of faith. How do you view that?
Look, I mean, obviously there's personal views on this. I mean, our view, my view, would be that the best possible palliative care is what we need, and I think as a sector, you know, we can do far better than we are. I mean, I've seen palliative care in action. Some of our clinicians that have been there by many bedsides, if we do it well and we care deeply and personally, it can provide the greatest savings.
Do you share that view, Katie Allen?
To be honest, when it comes to palliative care for cancer, I'm completely with you, Mike, but actually having watched my father descend into dementia, he was a doctor himself and he knew what was ahead, and he couldn't speak for the last year of his life. He couldn't walk. His only words that were left were thank you. And it's a terrible disease. It's a terrible disease. So I think people, to be able to have the choice and the control, and I think the voluntary assisted dying laws in Victoria have been, I think, I have to say, well handled. And I think that we need to have this sort of conversation, particularly for dementia.
I think you probably need a drink of water. I think we probably all need a drink of water. That is all we've got time for tonight. A huge thanks to our wonderful panel. Katie Allen, Jane Holton, Mike Baird, Claire O'Neill and Joseph Ibrahim. Please thank them all. As always, this show is always about the audience questions, and so many of you have shared so many personal stories tonight. There's people crying everywhere I look, so thank you all for contributing tonight so wonderfully. Next week, Canberra's culture of silence. I'll be joined by Government Senators Susan McDonald, Labor's Anne Ali, former Liberal staffer Danya Marnie. And from the All About Women Festival, artificial intelligence expert Kate Crawford and author and feminist Isabel Allende. We're excited about this one. We'll see you then. Good night.